My project is called Stone and Soul: How Regional Italian Architecture Reflects Its Citizens. First, we begin with Rome. Rome is from its founding, prideful city, and that's very evident in its citizens and in its structures. Today, there are many structures that would be quite controversial for what they stand for, and I believe the Colosseum is a great example of this. What was once a spot where people were murdered and killed is still looked upon with pride for what it stood for the city and its history. Next, we look at the Vatican. While it's technically its own city and its own country, it is also the heart of Rome in many ways. It's also the heart of Catholicism, which is very fitting because many Roman citizens consider Catholicism, Christianity, and its morals to be the center focus of their lives. Its beauty represents the beauty of the individual, and it is a way for them to give glory to the God they so love. The Roman Forum is a great example of ancient history living in a modern city. It is in many ways a reminder of the history of Rome and its great triumphs, and its emptiness somewhat represents the fall of Rome. And while Romans are a very prideful people, they also do acknowledge this fall, and yet they somehow overlook it, and they like to glorify the past that once was the great Roman Empire. And that is why it still stands today. The Vittorio Emanuele II Monument is an Italian war memorial which was built in the 1800s but honors those fighting back into the early days of the Roman Empire. Romans have not always been on the right side of history, including the Italians in World War II and fights against indigenous peoples, and yet they have this grand structure because while they may not have a great history and may be cloudy, it is their history nonetheless. Throughout all my travels, I personally found the Amalfi Coast to be the most beautiful part of Italy. Of every city we have traveled to, the Amalfi Coast architecture truly represents its citizens the best. The citizens are very simple in nature. They live off the land and they thrive based on the situations around them. This is similar to the architecture. It is built into the land, and it cascades naturally into the hills. It does not interrupt the natural beauty that is there. Its simple nature is very evident in the people and their personalities. They are simple, they don't need much, and they love and enjoy the beauty of the natural place that they live in. And the last city whose architecture and people we will look at is Florence. First, we look at the baptistry, which is separate from the Duomo because the people in Florence felt that in order to enter into full communion with the church, you must first be baptized, and initially you should thus be separated. Next, we look at the Dominican Basilica. It was very important to the people of Florence that they have a beautiful site for political and church activity, which is ironic because that is exactly the Roman style, and yet they want it to be considered separate from Rome. Next, we look at the commercialized town square. It is very symbolic for Florence because it was once a beautiful historic site, and yet after a fire, the people of Florence were not sure what to do with it. Finally, they decided to go the modern route, and thus modern aspects of the city started to come in more and more, to include but not limited to beauty salons and Apple stores. Finally, we look at what many people consider to be the staple point of Florence, the Duomo. The Duomo is built in a very intentional style and represents the mindset of many people in Florence. Florentines often want to distance themselves from Romans. Roman churches are built in a very certain way. They are built simple on the outside but beautiful on the inside, which symbolizes the church's view that while somebody may not be the best looking on the outside, they can be very beautiful on the inside nonetheless. In order to be unique and distance themselves, Florentines built the Duomo in a different style, which many of their other churches symbolize as well. They built it simple on the inside, but very beautiful on the outside. In this way, they stand apart from the Romans. I thank you very much for your time. I hope that I offered some great insight into the cities, their structures, and how it represents the people, and I can't thank you enough for such a great trip.